This video is about dissecting the similarities between the Gen Z and millennial age group. It's been a conversation online that's been going on about the differences, similarities, who started things first and all that stuff, and who's more flyer or whatever, right? But I'm focusing on the issues that we all face. We can all talk about who did what first, but there's real issues, right? So it's literally trying to come to a sense and an understanding of all these things, whether it's financial insecurity, whether it's people thinking that they wanted to achieve certain things and wanted it at a certain point, and then they found out that, hey, life happened and they didn't get to where they believed they were going to get to when they were younger. And then obviously the future reservations that some people have, the future sort of anxieties that can take place in certain people. But it's just really also about coming to a conclusion of how one can rationalize these things and not think in a certain way that is not even doing any kind of benefit to you anyway, if you're in your head too much. But the question is, what are we actually looking to do about it? So we're going to go through people's opinions. We're going to hear what people are saying, dissect it, and then, come to a conclusion at the end. But before, like the video and let's get into it.
At this point, I seriously think Gen Z is just screwed. In 2026, Gen Z just simply earns way less than it costs to survive. The average Gen Zer makes about $25K a year, which is around $21,000 a month, and spends basically all of it on bills or rent. Nearly half of Gen Z runs out of money before the end of the month ends, and that's not just budgeting, that's just survival at that point. And don't get me started on student loan debt, because the average Gen Zer also has about $30K of student loan debt on top of all of that. We are spending more on essentials than any other previous generation, and wages just keep going down, and the cost of living just keeps going up. You're not failing in life. The system is just completely fucked us over. Budgeting does help, don't get me wrong. I still use mine to budget and track all of my expenses, but the system is still failing us.
Nobody talks about the level of disappointment it feels as an older Gen Zer to have done everything right and still get nothing. I'm talking about working hard, getting the degrees, following the exact plan that all the older generations told us to follow to obtain stability, and realizing that we are not getting that life anymore. Like, as a matter of fact, that life doesn't even exist. Like, I grew up being told, you feel me, go to school, don't get pregnant, don't chase after no boys, do this, do that. And I did. And I was fully convinced that, I was going to graduate, I was going to get a job, a house, travel a little bit, max out my 401k. You feel me? The version of adulthood that made all the struggling worth it. But instead, everything just feels super expensive, super unattainable, and just like unrealistic. And don't get me wrong, like, I'm still extremely grateful for the life that I have. I'm still very blessed, and I'm glad that I did the things that I did. But I am finding myself constantly mourning the life that I thought I was going to have.
She ain't lying. When it comes down to it, if you look at it just when you were younger, what you were told, as she said, you were told, look, if you do such and such, you will be successful. Or if you just work hard and you pick maybe this kind of degree, or you pick this, being a doctor, being a lawyer, especially if you're from a certain background. If you're from a certain background, you will know about, doctor, lawyer, and all these job titles that were considered by your parents the thing to do. And it's not like they're not. It's just the fact that that was the whole mentality. If you do such and such, you will achieve whatever, you want. If you do it in this way, there was like a specific way you have to work hard in order, but there was no information about how to work. It was just work hard. And now obviously you have to work, in a certain way that gives you that kind of ability to see a result. But it was always work hard, but there was no tact of how to articulate that, read your books, this, that, and the other, which is a good thing. I was one of those guys, right? Read, understood certain things, but it does get to the point where you're like, okay, that wasn't the only sort of way. And it's not like you blame anybody. It's not like you look at your parents and say, oh, they didn't do this. It's more of they were under that kind of assumption too. That if you work hard, this is what happens. But not all the time. The term work hard is the logical way in hindsight to actually say. It's also about how you work. It's also about the steps you take. How do you connect with certain people potentially that will help your sort of advancement? Who do you hang with? Where do you get information to understand what sort of field you may go into? Because there could be one field that you want to get into and it's quite expansive. So it's all about trying to get those things understood. And that's where parenting comes into it. But a lot of the time, again, parenting at a certain age, particularly if you're a millennial in Gen Z environment, it's always just the general way of saying work hard and you will get there. And then you find out that you may finish uni, or you may go to uni, or you may not even go. You may start work earlier, and then you're working and people are working and they're not seeing anything of what they were told would be. Because work hard doesn't only mean go to uni, right? Work hard is just work hard. So anything you may do, you may, like I say, finish school and decide to go straight to work and work hard. And you realize you've not got everything that you were told, you know? And that is the thing. It kind of confuses people. It made people annoyed. It made people think, which is not even think. People are now looking at it that, hey, we've been told a bag of nonsense, you know, just to work hard. And that goes from school, that goes from a lot of people. And that doesn't mean you don't work. There's a way of working. That is the thing. There's a way of being strategic. There's a way of being understanding of, okay, how do you find, for example, gaps in markets to try and facilitate something? It's all of those things. Now, the work hard aspect, I guess, is just about keeping at it, being consistent. But there was also these mentalities that people told us when we were young that said, if you do this, this will happen. And it doesn't fall into that sort of way as easily as we were told. And I think that's the main gripes with people within that age group. We were told it goes like this to achieve this, but more often than not, you may finish a degree, you may finish a certain industry that you start in, and then you realize you haven't got anything that you can do that's in relation to what you did at uni. Or you may finish uni and say, okay, now I'm going to try and go into my career within that thing I studied. And it turns out that you're not even going in to the area that you've studied, because sometimes it's hard to get a job in that. It's hard to get, you know, some kind of chance. People end up having a degree and it's like, okay, I've got a degree for what? What I studied, now I'm in another place. And what I studied, it's like it doesn't make any sense anymore, because now I've had to go somewhere else because I needed to earn some money. Because what I was trying to do within my course wasn't opening up. There was no doors opening. It's like people are thinking, I worked hard for the degree and now I'm having to go to a different route because I can't get the route that I wanted, which my degree entails. So it's all of these things. I thought, I have to work hard, right? No, you ended up having to go another route, you know, and that's the thing. Some people in that age group thinking, but I thought that's what it was. Eventually they start thinking, oh, the system was never for us. It was never for us. You know, it was never for the average person. It was only for the person to think outside of it, if they ever do, and say, how do I make this work for me now?
So I just heard somebody say on Threads, the number one wealth killer is card notes. And I said, I feel like for my generation, millennials specifically, it's student loans, 100% student loans. I know a good amount of people who graduated, I'm 36, 15, 16 years ago when we were 22 with $50,000 in student loan debt who owe $68,000 today. And they've been making payments the last 15 years on their loans. And that's not as uncommon as you think. The problem with student loans is they are not bankruptable. And there's no like trading in your degree if you don't use it or you don't like it or like you just have to pay it. You know what I'm saying? But life hit and a lot of us just weren't educated on the process of how simple interest loans work and how when we signed up for these income-based repayment plans that they weren't even actually giving us a payment large enough to cover the interest. So our student loan payment should have been $550, but they gave us a payment of $200 based on our income. But the interest every month was $315 a month. So every month we're paying them $200, $225, and $100, $150 is getting added to our loan. Even though we've been making payments 10, 12, 15 years, we now owe 10 grand more, $15,000 more. And we weren't educated on that portion of it. A lot of us just thought like, oh, this is the payment. It's going towards something, but it wasn't. I've personally witnessed student loans stop people from buying homes, homes, advancing in life, getting approved for apartments because it's destroying their credit. Like, student loans, 100% number one wealth killer for millennials.
That's his opinion about another issue with finances and being in a sense of constraint, because student loans turns out to be a scam. It was only to get students to get into the system, to be able to work for the system, and then obviously pay back the system in loans. And then obviously when you pay back the system through when you get a job. That's like, once you start coming to certain realizations about what things are, and you start looking at the system and saying, okay, cool, this is what it's about. Okay, what can you do? Because at the end of the day, prime example of that being a financial burden. The first two ladies were speaking on, obviously, not being able to just maneuver easily financially because of the fact that, it's a strain on their finances, what they are doing in terms of when they were told work hard. And now with this guy, another issue with the financial standings of millennials and Gen Zs are these student loans. So it affecting credit rating, it affecting you being able to do other things that you will need to do. For example, you can't even think of potentially saving. You can't even say, okay, I'm going to save this amount because you've got this crazy amount of student loans to pay. You did a course for all those years, and now they're making you pay for it. Not just literally, but physically, emotionally, where you have to now pay lump sums per month. And for me, like I say, once you start looking at things, you start saying, okay, system wasn't set up for the average person. It was set up just to be able to enable people to work for it. And then you get your piece of the pie in whatever level you can get to. If you manage to work up the system and play the game, as they say, then maybe, you can do your thing. Depending on the company, depending on the vertical, you can still move and you can still be fruitful, right? But for the most part, the majority of people, most people are average. Those are the people that are getting hit the most within the Gen Z and millennial age groups.
I am 43. I'm broke and I'm absolutely exhausted. Like, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and I just don't know what to do with myself anymore. I don't know what to do with myself. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been watching a lot of videos on YouTube, and this kind of content has been popping up. So I thought I'd, say my bit as well, get involved in the conversation and try and shine a light on, I don't know, what would you call it, like the plight of the millennial. So yeah, let me tell. I guess, like, where do I start? Let me tell you a bit about myself. I suppose 43. I've worked since I was 15. I've never not had a job. I've always worked. Like, we was lied to when we were at school. I was a kid of the 80s. I was born in the 80s and grew up in the 90s, and times were amazing. Like, I always tell, I've got 3 boys, and I always tell my boys, like, you missed out, man. Like, your childhood is going to be something that you remember, but I honestly believe that the 80s into the 90s was the best couple of decades in history. It was amazing.
The 90s were one of a kind. One of a kind. I'm London born, right? But if you're from London, and any major city for that matter around the world, it was a different feeling. Just even the feeling, the atmosphere outside, you're playing, the games you play, aspects of school, what was on TV, the lack of social media at that time, TV programs, films, cartoons, you name it. Like, we were TV people, right? You watch TV, you could learn, you could laugh, you could cry, there was all sorts on TV. Not everything was perfect, but there were things that you can look back on and say, oh yeah, I remember that. The games you played and the experiences you had, which was not just cooped up in your crib.
And I grew up being told, go to school, get a job, like, get your education, go to college. Like, it was just assumed you'd go to college. There wasn't really much talk of university when I was younger. But the plan for me was always go into mechanics, but I never did very well academically. Like, in fact, I did quite shit. So really only had the opportunity to sell my labor, sell my time. You know, that's all changed now. Like, I have self-awareness and, you know, accountability, and I can see where I went wrong retrospectively, but we were never taught these things at school. Like, we were lied to as a generation. We were told to do these things and that you'd do all right. You know, go to school, get a job, save money, buy a house, get married, have some kids. Like, that was the utopian dream. Had I known now what I knew, had I knew then what I know now, I would have done a lot better. But the system is rigged against you. Like, you know, in the last 5 years, I've learned more about money, which we don't get taught in schools. Like, we're told to go into society and be productive members of society, but we're not given the rule book to the game. Like, we're supposed to figure it out on our own. And how many people are, you know, when they leave school to the time they start, I don't know, buying a house or building a family, how many of us have got the knowledge about savings and investments and banking and how money works and where it comes from and what inflation is? Like, none of us. Like, we probably don't even give a shit. We just want to go to work, earn the money, go out on a Saturday night, piss it all up the wall, feel shit on Sunday, and then start again next week. We were sold an idea of a society that I believe benefited the people that wrote the rule book. And we're all we're all minions. We're all part of the machine to help grow their wealth. And like, I'm now 43, and I'm washed out, man.
He did allude to obviously being lied to, and that's the part that I want to get into, and obviously making it understandable, you know, for you to understand what his mentality was when he was younger, and then obviously what it has developed to. Because, like I'm saying already in this video, it's a thing where people are not happy about the fact that they were told the system is for you, more or less, if you work hard. But millennials and Gen Z are still seeing, for the most part, the effects of that were not positive. Once you mature and you realize that, that's where the knowledge can at least empower you to now make potentially moves, whether it's small moves to try and facilitate what you may want to do. And that's what it's about. That's what I'm for. It's about just understanding what you are and what you can do using your best qualities. And a lot of people say, oh, but I don't know what it is. Yeah, it's because you're working every day. You're too focused on the monotonous nature of life. Got to pay these bills, because if I don't, this, all that worry that you're putting on yourself. And I'm not saying you don't have worry, but it's something that shouldn't take place, because you will never be able to understand who you are and what you are good at. Whether you tap into it, whether you sit down and think, whether you try different things, it has to get to that point, because the system, as you mature and you realize, was never designed for the complete benefit of the people that contribute to it. It was designed to be able for you to get something out of it if you can, but you have to come to your own conclusion and your own learning. You have to come to that. So the system is not a thing to completely look at and say, okay, that's it. You know, I'm just going to sit and the system's going to do it all. If you want to, you can think from that perspective, but that's where there's too much onus on someone being able to do what they want, and you're not able to make your own assessments of what you may want, because it could come to that point where you're stuck, or we're stuck, or people are stuck, you know, because we've just allowed the indoctrination from school. You have to do this, you have to do this. Yes, ma'am, yes, sir, and put your hand up. And like, we're so indoctrinated to school of what you can't do, what you can, to a point where the freedom to think and express is being suppressed on purpose. And that's something that's bigger than just this aspect of Gen Z and millennial. That's a whole nother conversation. But the point is, it's about tapping in to your natural qualities, assessing yourself and being honest. Oh, but I don't know anything. You have to choose to assess who you are apart from your job, apart from your career even. If your career and everything is, you're good with it, then that's fine. And you believe you're being maximized, then that's different. But if you get to this point where he's been lied to, like many other Gen Z and millennials, what is the next step? There's a lot of different ways now that you can put your stuff out, sell, whatever it is. And I think if you get out of your way and get out of that, oh, I'm embarrassed mentality, or this is something that's foreign to me, you will see it will start making you think better, differently, because you start saying, you know what? I want better. If you want better, you don't have to. If you're happy where you are or where anyone is, do your thing. But the point is, if you believe you've been lied to, if you believe the system, and you should know now the system is not set up specifically for your complete benefit, then you should start looking at ways, or people should start looking at ways to say, you know what else? Because you have to discover it yourself. And that is something that should be a good thing.
Why is no one talking about the great millennial financial crisis? You've heard about the career crisis, but what if I told you it goes way deeper than that? We were told, go to university, get a good job, buy a house. You followed the plan and it hasn't delivered. Here's why. 1, wages have not kept up with living costs. 2, houses now cost 8 times the average salary. For our parents, that was just 4 times. The ultimate lie was that if you bought a property in London, you had made it. Meanwhile, prices have flatlined for a decade. Add on rising interest rates, and even the highest earners are feeling it. 3, student loan interest rates hit insane highs. And the chances of you ever paying it off are now dwindling despite it taking up a massive chunk of your income every single month. 4, your parents had jobs for life. You're facing redundancy risk every couple of months. And the tech overlords have confirmed mass layoffs are coming due to AI. This isn't speculation, this is their strategy. Oh, and people really can't figure out why millennials aren't having kids. Maybe it's because childcare costs 1/3 of what a dual income household earns. The same rules do not apply. Your parents had generous pensions, job security, and affordable housing. You don't. You didn't fail, they just moved the goalposts. So what do? 1, you can't afford to coast anymore hoping it will all work out. Time to get serious about your finances. Plan now or panic later. 2, job security is dead. What matters now is how fast you could get your next job if you needed to. 3, your house is part of your retirement plan. It can't be the only plan. Stay on top of your pension and invest regularly if you can.
He gets bought up also by American companies. So again, we don't see the wealth of it. It means wages have gone up 60+% over the last 10 years. In Poland, they've gone up over 40%, but in the UK, they flatlined.
Bigger GDP per capita than the UK.
If you go back to 2014 to 2024, average American salaries have increased from circa 47k to 57k. The average UK salary has increased from 33,000 to 36,000. What's interesting is if you take the top 10 percentile, average American wealth has gone up 28% to an average of £153,000. But in the UK, it's gone from £70,000 to £71,000. Across that period, UBS wealth report suggested that 54% of all global assets were now owned by Americans. It's this understanding that America, especially post the financial crisis, has become incredibly wealthy. Disproportionately wealthy to the UK as we've continued then to stutter along. And the problem that we've got is that we are a user of all the great American companies and everything, but we don't actually see the benefit or the revenue from that from our nation. So it's total wealth extraction and there's nothing coming back. We've been damaged by that, especially because all the ingenuity and entrepreneurship of what we want to create quickly gets bought up also by American companies. So again, we don't see the wealth of it.
You had the first video of the woman speaking from the UK perspective about the issues financially within the Gen Z and millennial age range. But if that's the case, the lack of sort of growth in finances over the years in terms of from jobs, you have to look at it and then question, okay, so if that's the case, what is the way we are going to start changing our mind? That's what this video is about. How are we going to start renewing the mind? Okay, cool. This is what it is. How are we going to start trying to do small things maybe to help our existence? How are we going to try and do small things, whether it's small savings, whether it's a certain amount that you may want to start. And then eventually you may want to start going from saving to investing. Then you may want to start. And then obviously you're having to do research on all these things. And anything that you believe is comfortable, trying to make another way. The stats, the numbers of how things were in the boomer age range, for example, homes were at this price. They had better coverage when it comes to taxes. They had better, opportunities, basically. For example, in London, back in the day when council housing, which is still a thing, is basically government housing. When that was at a certain amount. If you happen to get council housing in the 90s and then manage today to still have those, particularly, let's just say you had a few flats, you know, or a few, even one or two properties back then, and you've managed to still do well with it, you're doing pretty well because of the sort of rates. Because I remember in the 90s, the sort of amounts properties were in comparison. And even if you do the calculations today, you are still seeing a big difference, you know, for the average place, for example, in London. Now, the average place in London is not even any point to talk about how much that is. But 2026 onwards, what are the steps that people are going to start taking, you know, for themselves to try and say, you know what, even if you're not even saying, I don't even want to look too far, but what are you doing at least, or what are we trying to do, you know, in the immediate? You know, what are we trying to do in the immediate to try and help our situation? Because we know, and I'm sure so far in this video, and you should know by now, the system is not here for your complete benefit. It does have benefits, but I'm saying your complete. What is the thing where you can make your own movements? Because really and truly, as we're on this earth, we're supposed to be moving freely, using our abilities and bringing things to life that we think, not just being told this is what you should be doing with your abilities. No, especially if you want to bring something that is positive and good for people, that should be looked at. Not just sitting there thinking, okay, this is happening and this is bad. Okay, what's the steps? Companies, like American companies, are buying stuff up in the UK, buying real estate and buying, you know, things that are going to try and benefit their country. So UK need to fix up first and foremost. And then obviously people that are just the general citizen need to start looking at what one can do, you know, as a collective, you know, for the betterment of your existence.
I think I speak for all millennials when I say, like, rest doesn't really bring relief. It triggers anxiety. Like, the second we sit down, our brains are like, all right, but what are you forgetting? You know, we don't rest. We mentally scan. Did I miss an email, a deadline? Was there a bill I was supposed to pay last week? Like, even when we plan to rest, it still feels like a pop quiz on adulthood. Like, if we stop, the universe is going to notice and somehow, like, deduct us points. Like, I'll be on my couch for 5 minutes and my brain's like, you should be doing laundry. Why don't you go reorganize the spice rack? You definitely didn't plan dinner this week. Like, somehow doing nothing started to feel almost impossible. So we just hover, we scroll, we just check one thing. And I think it's because we grew up in this constant state of readiness. Like, be prepared, be available, be productive. Half the time we didn't even know why. It was just what you did. So now resting feels almost risky. Like, if we stop even for a second, something's going to fall apart and it'll somehow be our fault. So we're not bad at resting. It's just we grew up in a world that never taught us it was allowed.
To me, he's not lying. I've had many of those instances in my time, in my past, of thinking, geez, I'm sitting, I'm relaxed. And it's not like I have anything to do per se. It's just I've done what I need to do for the day or even for a couple of days and I'm chilling. I've had those kind of mentalities of, it looks like I'm not doing nothing. But it's like I'm thinking from someone else's perspective as opposed to my own perspective. Like, why do I think that I'm not doing anything? You know, and if I'm not doing anything, what is that affecting? But again, that whole system mentality of you've got to pay this, you've got to pay this, you've got to do this. It's, again, it starts from young. How you've been indoctrinated to say, hey, what are you doing? You know, why are you not doing nothing? Why are you not? Again, being useful, being valuable is important. But just being busy, sometimes we look at that and think that's important. It's all about how productive you are in whatever you're doing, you know? And I think sometimes that lack of being able to relax, it's like even there's some jokes online about if you're from a certain background, you know, your parents will come in or your mom or dad will come in and try and barge through your door in your bedroom because they don't hear nothing. They see that you're relaxing. When they come there, start questioning, oh, you're lying in your bed, and you know, you start getting questioned. It's that sort of mentality that, again, it's from a certain age group that you have to look at and say it's from the years prior, the boomer age groups that had that mentality, and even prior to the boomers. It's just that whole thing of you have to be doing something, right? But that something, as you get older, it has to be logical. It can't just be something. It has to be something productive that's going to benefit, you know, whether it's you or a group, or you have stuff that you're doing that's going to benefit, that you believe in the future. But just being, you know, in that anxious state, a lot of people go through that, you know. You have to go to work and stay busy. You know, we like a productive workplace where we're busy, you know, get stuck in, you know, all these mentalities is what we've been taught. Get stuck in, be busy. And how do you feel about dealing with a fast paced environment? All of these things are all relatable to the system, and the system, it takes a toll. But the key is try and benefit from it. That's the only thing I'm trying to say from this video. Try and use it for your advantage. Use it for your advantage. Because at the end of the day, the system was used for the people who set it up. And the continual maintenance of it and managing of it is set up for those to chop the most money out of it and the most resources out of it. So are we going to start checking these things and saying, what are we going to do? But also there's a report about the millennial and Gen Z age group, basically wanting to achieve things at a certain point and wanting to do things, right? People are having an anxiousness about that. So this was a report, I believe, from a British publication. It talks about 77% of millennials between 25 to 39 and 83% of Gen Z, 16 to 24, are currently feeling pressure to reach life milestones. And this was done in 2026. This report, and it's something that has to change. These numbers are ridiculous. You can't be 16 to 24 with all these milestones in your head and thinking, what am I going to do and how am I going to? No, it has to get to the point where you have to look at it and start doing more research on the ages certain people come into their financial stride. And when you look at your 16 to 24 year old age group, you're a baby in comparison to when men, for example, generally hit their financial stride and when they start really, really getting to that level. Because of social media, it's allowed itself, you've allowed social media to cloud your mind about some of the instances you see that are not the majority, if you do research, on people looking like they're doing something or actually doing something. So your mind is in that state because you're thinking, oh, I'm looking at socials, but that's not the majority. Doesn't mean you can't look at it and use it as maybe if you want to do your own thing as inspiration, but it should never be a comparative analysis on, oh, but he's at this age and that's where you go wrong. And that's lame in my humble opinion. Anyway, to be looking at next man and saying, you do your thing. You put your steps in process and do what you need to do, because what they're doing, that's not your journey. And that's how you got to look at it. There's a survey in America as well. A report says Gen Z and millennials are in a constant state of worry. You look at it and think, again, why? Gen Z and millennials are worrying about finances, and that's at 53%. Family and things they need to take care of. A bit like that first video that introduced this topic, which was saying, look, I feel like I can't even sit down and I feel like I got to do this and that. It's because of what we've been taught about being able to work hard and you will get something. Just work hard, not work tactfully, not learn about this thing first and learn how to communicate, learn how to network, learn how to, be of value. What is value? All of these things, just work hard. So now you're thinking, I gotta keep doing things. Now it gets to the point where your mind is not where it needs to be. And that's where the problems lie. So you got to look into it. This is a widespread issue, not just in the UK, it's the Western world, US, UK, and major cities around the world. The mentalities need to change. Once you realize the system, again, it wasn't for your main benefit. You've got to look at it and say, what can I do to benefit? There's even a lady who also has this kind of thought about where she thought she would be when it comes to being with someone and having a relationship.
I thought for sure by 30, I was going to be married with like a few kids. I thought by like at least 3 kids when I was 25, I was like, oh, by 30, I'm going to be married. I'm going to have kids. Like 30 is so old, like for sure. I'm going to be settled down. Then I turned 30 and I was like, okay, like by 32 for sure. Then at 32, I was like, okay, like by 35, like for real, like 35, I'll be married. I'll have the kids. Like, because 35 is like, I'm getting old. That's like a geriatric pregnancy at that point. Like I've got to have kids by then. I'm 35 now. I used to think 30 was old. Then I thought 35 was old. First of all, I feel youngest, like young. I'm halfway to 40. So like by 40, right? Like by 40, I'll be married and have the kids and be living out my dreams that I thought I was going to have at 30. And I feel like this is not talked about enough because I cannot be the only 35-year-old on the internet that is like having this realization, like, how did I get here? How did I get here so fast?
And even for women, that's another thing, that independent stuff that you were taught. Being independent is one thing, but being codependent is another. This mentality has contributed to not understanding what makes logical sense. You were taught, and sometimes parents particularly teach you to be independent because they're not given the right game that says, you know what? Do what you've got to do, whether it's education, whether it's career, setting up a business, whatever it is that is going to be beneficial that you believe you have the skills for. But that doesn't mean I'm going to completely put off potentially having a relationship that you may want. Because you get to this point, if you've not been mindful of it, and then you start thinking, where did the time go? Because the mentality wasn't to focus on the fact that you have to be codependent, not just independent completely. That is only for the people that have chosen that. But if you didn't, like this woman, she didn't want it. The mentalities of, oh, you know, I thought I was going to be there is something that troubles people because they've been taught just to focus on, in this case, being independent. And that's a woman thing mainly. Just be independent. And maybe you will get what you want down the line. Oh, you're 25, you're young, you still got a lot of time. That's what they say. Oh, you're 28, you got a lot of time, girl. But by the time you know it, as you said, 35, 36, 38, 40, 42, it can happen once you have that mentality of focusing on just being independent. Especially when it's not something that needs to happen. You can still do what you need to do, but still be understanding that, hey, I need to be open because I want something. So, okay, what am I doing to help that situation? And that's where these mentalities and these percentages of worry will decrease if we start changing how we think.
Marriage rates are the lowest in recorded history in many developed nations. And it's not about Tinder, it's about cost of living. Weddings cost tens of thousands of dollars and divorce costs even more. When survival is the priority, love becomes a luxury. Birth rates are dropping below replacement level in most rich countries. And not because people hate kids, but because the math doesn't work out. Daycare is like a second mortgage. One income doesn't cut it. Two incomes don't even cut it. So people opt out. And this isn't laziness, it's a rational response to a broken system.
Obviously, from a statistical point of view, is true, but I also have to say, okay, what are the ways to circumvent? If people are not having relationships and choosing because they believe, you know, they don't have the finances for it, that's one thing. If you're a person that's an individual, for example, if you're a guy and you don't believe and you're not in a position to comfortably provide for yourself, then yeah, there's no point to look at it from that perspective. But I will say also, there's another way to look at it and say, if you are in a position that you are being able to take care of yourself and you're working and you're doing what's required, right? You're decent and you meet somebody that is also working. I believe still there's ways to make that work. If you have the same mentality to say, you know what, this is what you earn, this is what I earn. We're going to do, for example, for a couple of years, we're going to save this amount. We're going to purposely not maybe, you know, let's just say you're going to get married first, do it the right way. Marriage, then the kids, ideally. But let's just say you do that and you say, look, we're going to save for this amount of time. so we can give ourselves some, emergency funds. We can give ourselves some freedom to be able to plan having kids. So then once we can acquire kids, we see, okay, cool, this is what we can do. We're not going to live in this city that costs this much. We're going to live just outside of it. Like, all of these things can take place if two people are on the same page. So yes, people are not having kids based on what he was mentioning. Sometimes, he says something about having love is like a luxury when you can't afford, but love shouldn't be the main thing you're going for initially when you're in a relationship, in my opinion. There has to be two people that are understanding that this is in my opinion, a role that we both have to have certain characteristics that we're both fulfilling to be able to build something, because it's about building. Then as you develop, love can come into it, but you need to have the resource, you need to have the mentality first, you need to have the plan first. Once you're both on the same page, I don't see why two or more people are gathered together. They can't think, to make certain things happen, especially if they've got the right mentality. So there's that. But yes, kids, relationships, things aren't happening a lot of the time, and things have decreased, and there's reasons for that. And I think social media is one of them. How we have used social media, how we have used the platform. I think that's another major issue that doesn't get spoken about. People just say, oh, social media. It's how we've used it. When I remember years ago when Instagram was a thing, it started off one way and then it became another way. We've chosen to use these social media platforms in certain ways to make it be as such that connection has now started to diminish in certain instances because we've chosen to use the platforms a certain way. And these platforms have chosen to accept how they've been used. For example, prime example of how, for example, you can see women on there. You can see a lot, put it this way, right? That immediately doesn't want any connection because you're just seeing somebody in a certain way, presented a certain way. And that doesn't mean that's indicative of all. But for example, there's a portion where you can just see a woman and be like, okay, cool. Eventually you start not looking for any kind of connection because you keep seeing a woman in a certain light. It just makes people's minds be, in my opinion, think, okay, I see you here every day on this platform. Okay, I might as well just watch you. We didn't present ourselves on Instagram all those years ago when it first started in that way. We still wanted to connect, but now it's like it's a shop window. Although you don't buy, but it's like people are looking at you in that way, for example. And it's like people want to show off. Some people want to show what they've got in more ways than one. How do you expect connection when we've used these platforms like it's some form of pick and mix? It doesn't advocate for genuine connections. And now that's not to say people don't have that on social media at moments, but for the most part, it's just it's like a pick and mix environment.
Hey, so I'm 31 years old, right? I got no house, no wife, no kids. You feel me? And it's kind of like a good part of my thought process sometimes throughout the day is the fact that, I don't have a kid, a wife, or a house. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing. You feel me? Like some days I be wishing that like I had a wife so I had my person. You feel me? Some days I be wishing that I had kids. But then I listen to my homies talk to their kids on the phone sometimes and then I be like, I ain't ready for that, right? Some days I wish I had a house. Other days I don't be tripping about a house. Put me in like a little penthouse or condo or something. I'm cool. I'm good off the houses, right? But I'm saying all this to say that like growing up, and then once I reached a certain age, I figured by 31, I would have my kids, have my house, and have my wife and all of that stuff because of, situations I've been in before. And it just didn't turn out that way. You feel me? It didn't turn out that way. And I guess you fight a thing of like where you should be and where you actually are, or like where you want to be and where you actually are, and things like that. And it kind of like mind fuck you sometimes to make you think that you should be somewhere else than where you actually are, instead of just putting your feet on the ground and going day by day with where you at and what you got. And then you kind of like look at your peers and stuff. Like I got a lot of homies that's either married and got kids and stuff like that, or just homies that got kids, or homies that got everything together, house, kids, wife, and all that good stuff. And it's kind of like, damn, you feel me? Like I want the same thing, right? But I'm just not there yet. I'm in my own journey. They in their own journey. So I guess the message I'm giving y'all today is just like, put your feet on the ground, where you at, focus on where you at, don't necessarily compare where you at to somewhere else, and you know what I'm saying, just keep going. If it's meant for it to happen for you, it's gonna happen.
He had a good mentality about it. He had a good, thought process at the end there where he says, look, focus on what you're doing. Can't be looking at a next person and thinking, okay, that's what they're doing. Again, what is best for you, you should know. I mean, if you're honest with yourself, what is best for you, because making big decisions for the wrong reason is going to be a problem down the line, because you can make a decision, but there's always consequences for every decision. So it's just about, obviously, we're all trying to do better. I'm a person that's always trying to, assess how, one is doing things and how one can pivot. So it's all about making that kind of mentality be a thing where you're always trying to think of, a solution. Because yes, he's looking at his peers and thinking, okay, maybe he wants something. Maybe I want to achieve this milestone of having kids, or having a wife, or having a place, a house. But he's probably, as you said, he's not ready, more or less. When he gets to that point, he should be able to at least assess better, because now he's in a state of understanding. And then obviously you can make the best moves after. But these are some of the things that are going through the minds of millennials and Gen Z.
I really was thinking about this. My mom just asked to come over and cook and clean for me. And, I am always on the go. Sometimes I just don't have the time to do all the things that I want to do. But it helped, and it kind of like racked my mind about being selfless and being a mom, right? Like, my mom is always a mom and she's always on. And being a modern woman now, I feel like I am thinking, like, am I going to be a good mom when my time comes? Because I have been so invested in myself for these 32 years. Like, my mom had kids at 20. Like, am I going to have the capacity for a child if one ever comes? Because, like I said, I'm 32 and my mom is still coming to mom. I'm so grateful for her. I think it just like struck my mind. I'm like, no matter what, my mom is always selfless, always caring, always loving, always want to nurture, take care of her children no matter how old they get. I talked to my sister yesterday and she was like, yeah, I miss her being here, because literally she would come and have my house spotless. Like, that is her love language, that is her act of service, but that's also her selflessness when I guess you give outside of your body. And at my big ass age, I'm just, sorry for my cursing, but I'm just in here thinking, like, am I going to be able to be that selfless person? I don't know.
Do you see what being a Gen Z, a millennial, and a modern, for example, woman can entail? Even if it's a modern man, because modern men also have some of the things they do that they think is just, normal, but it's affecting other areas that it shouldn't be, because now it affects you and your natural nature. Let me explain. This woman, on the surface, career, it seems, doing her thing, moving and shaking, boss babe, some of the terms, right? Cool, doing her thing, happy about it, I'm sure she is. But the system, I'm going to use this again, the system and the drive of it to push people to work in ways where you're just in a monotonous state, because you have been taught or told in more ways than one that being successful is the height of life. And what is success looks like being, productive in ways where you're on the go, you're setting up things, you're doing things, you're earning, as much money as you can. And that is it. So now her natural nature, she's questioning if her natural nature that biologically she has the capability of, I'm sure, hopefully she can deliver children. She has the ability to do so, but she's questioning her natural nature, God-given nature, if she can have time for kids that she should have time for. But because you've been taught, the modern woman, for example, in this case, that she can do this, she has to do this, she can do this, she can do that, she's now questioning her natural instincts, if she even has the capacity to do it. And that is a result of the system and the push for people to be in that state of hustle and bustle culture. And that is a millennial and Gen Z thing. Hustle and bustle, side hustle. Not saying she's doing side hustle, but the mentality of getting up and being on the go. Now, your natural biological makeup and the ability to nurture, you're questioning, will you have time for it? And that's sometimes the detriment of being in this age group. Once we've been taught these things, or once some of these ideologies have been perpetuated by people, hustle culture mentality is within this age group. That has been created. It's not just an old school boomer thing. So it's self-inflicted a lot of time, but unfortunately, her natural instinct that she should just be thinking, oh, I can have a marriage and I can have a child or children. But because you've got this, or we've been taught, unfortunately, just this mentality within the Gen Z and millennial age group, you're now looking at these milestones with anxiety, and you shouldn't have to, because that is not something, if you really deep it and look at it, the mentality of hustle culture and mentality of being on the go all the time, it doesn't provide benefit as you always may assume. I'm saying earlier, we have to think of ways to improve our situations. For example, once we know the system is where it's at, it's not for us. But it doesn't mean you have to get to a point where it can come across like this, where your mum, who is of the older generation, is showing the qualities that most women are associated with in terms of what they say was more of a old school thing, the traditional sense of, being able to nurture and that's why that ideology of women back in the day were looked at in that way. That's not to say every woman back in the day was always about that. No, there were some independent women and doing their own thing. But her, the mum, she was described so well in a way where it's like, oh, that is the type of woman that would be conducive to be getting her milestones achieved. For example, a relationship, children. But being modern and being a modern woman and chasing all of these things, being busy, having all of these things is now unfortunately taking our natural way of being fruitful in ways where children can come forth. What is it doing that is detrimental to us? It seems it's doing a lot. It's making women question, will they be able to give to their own children? That's not to say you cannot get more, and more is bad. And it's how you have your ideology about it. It's if you put it up as the epitome of life. That's where we have a problem, because then you can start doing things that are untoward to try and get it. And that's where you nullify yourself. And that's what I've realized. It's like this lady, unfortunately, is questioning what shouldn't be questioned. It should just be something that she has the ability to just say, oh yeah, when it's my time, I'm going to have this child and I'm going to do such and such. But because the ideology of being a modern woman has been infiltrated, it's now taken her off course of her natural biological state to question if she's capable. Women shouldn't have to question this. This is why I said in my other videos about the manosphere topic. I've done some videos about it, the Louis Theroux documentary, and I was saying about women being in a certain position to understand their best ability is them to be facilitated and have roles. If she had a role of, this is how I believe a woman should be or could be, which is understanding her importance of her ability to deliver children, ability to assume herself as a wife. If she wants it, if any person wants it, then you will be able to then understand, okay, I'm doing my hustle and bustle nature, but I'm also being open to not nullify who I am, who I naturally am. Take the job away, take everything away. Who are you? And this is something that is being broken or hidden based on the hustle and bustle nature that people have all gravitated to because they say it's the way of success. And these are things we've got to look at, because it's something that has not helped in the long run for the most part, because a woman like this, or any woman, shouldn't question if they have the capability to be a mum. when that's your natural biological makeup. So you may say, what is the solution? It's the ability to understand what is your best qualities first. What is your role first? And I was saying this earlier about understanding what can you do that is outside of your work and the things that you do on a daily basis. Who are you outside of that if it was stripped away immediately? Being who you are, using your actual natural instincts is the key, not suppressing it for your hustle and bustle like life.
I think a lot of people in our generation suffer, like specifically Gen Z, suffer from the illusion of like the abundance of choice. And what I mean by that is the thinking that you have more options than you actually have. And I'm talking about in terms of finding a wife, finding a husband. I think that people think that they have many, many more potentials than what they actually truly do. When you jump on TikTok and you look good and then loads of people DM you and stuff like that, you think that you have a lot of choices. You think that it's fine, like, I don't even have to put in any effort right now because eventually I'll get a wife, eventually I'll get a husband. I don't actually think that's the reality. How many genuine connections do people make in our generation? I'll wait. Most people our age, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, haven't even been in a relationship. They haven't even had like a genuine, meaningful relationship. All we know is situationship. I think everybody thinks eventually one day they'll just stumble across their wife, stumble across their husband because they have so many choices. You actually, in reality, you don't. Social media makes us think that we're more desirable than we actually are. Nobody works on their personality. Everyone just works on how they look. Genuinely, people are insufferable.
This is what I was alluding to earlier about Instagram. It's like it's some pick and mix. It's like people think, okay, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there. Let's see. As you said, someone may DM. I'm going to try and get this, I'm going to try and get things going. Because it's like, it comes across like it's a catalog. So you think, okay, I've got these options. But really and truly, you don't. You don't. And what do you have the options for? What is the premise of these options? You got to question that. If you're a woman, you got to question it, for example. What options for what? Marriage? From the right type of man? Or is it options for, so these are things. You think, okay, I'll get to a certain age group and, I'll have this, relationship, for example. And then it turns out that it doesn't happen because you think you have too many options. You think you have so much time. And it starts dwindling, the options, and the ones that are for the right reasons that you may want, it even becomes even more tougher to find those types of options for the ones you may want. So what she was saying is true, particularly that Gen Z age group. It's not something that you should bank on when it comes to looking at social media, thinking that you've got so many options, because you don't. If you live in the real world. And if you want more and not just, then you will know what I mean. And you will know what you have to do to see and get more.
2030, the entire housing market is going to be upended. We won't be able to afford any housing. And the reason being is that we're seeing a flood of capital from foreign investors buying up what we call SFR, single family rent. Angela Rayner has an ambition to build 1.5 million homes. She's not going to achieve that. And if any homes that she does build will be through the assistance of foreign private equity. And that's going to come with all sorts of conditions, my friend. That housing is not going to be for you. It's not going to be for me. It's not going to be for residents of the UK. That housing is going to be gobbled up by foreign pension funds, foreign private equity. There's going to be a housing crisis beyond what we've ever seen before.
You see, stuff like that. People are at this point, I believe, where they're not even looking 5 years ahead. Some people are not even looking at 2030. They're just looking at, if today's Thursday, they're looking at Friday. If today's Saturday, they're looking at Monday. I'm telling you, that's what, they're just saying, okay, what can they do in the meantime? Now, you shouldn't be worrying, I believe, about your days as you keep going. You shouldn't, because it doesn't do anything. It does absolutely nothing. Once you start realizing this more and more and you start, unlearning the things, it doesn't do anything. But having, properties and places being bought out to a point where you think private property renting is crazy now, By the time it gets to that point, potentially it can be even more of an issue. But again, how do you circumvent? And that's the sort of mentality one should be thinking. Is there places outside of the whole of where you live in terms of even the country? You know, is there potential alternatives to be in a whole different environment, or use certain environments as business opportunities? Like, these are things I think, people, I'm sure, have to start looking at. So you've got to see always, the solution, the option in things, but it's at a point where it's real.
This is why millennials and Gen Zs are having a hard time buying a house. This house is listed for $425,000, and this is around the median home price. The payment out the door monthly is $3,100, and the median household income is $89,000. So this would cost about 42% of their gross income, which is not wise, and in most cases, they won't even qualify. But Freddie, look at this house. This isn't a starter home. This is luxury. But it was a starter home. Just 10 years ago, this exact same home sold for $228,000. And the monthly payment was just $1,400. So the median household income of $59,000 could get this starter home for just 29% of their gross income. It was beautiful. Today, to buy that same house, you would need a $130,000 salary for it to only be 29% of your income. So what's the other option if you don't make 130 but you make 89,000 as a median household income? You would have to buy a house that's only $280,000. Okay, but here's the problem. There's no homes available for under 300,000. The three that are in gray are actually townhomes. There is only one home in this entire area that's under $300,000. But when you look at 300 to 500, there's over 400 homes available. This is what happened to the housing market.
And that's in the US. A lot of people will see those, as you said, those 300,000 homes and $300,000 homes and think that's not where you want to live, depending, on the city. You may not want to live in certain environments in that regard, because they're probably not close to certain amenities, schooling potentially. And obviously you're going to have a car, but these are some of the issues, to try and get on that property ladder. The pricing, the lack of increase in wages generally, but specialist, careers are the ones where you can maximize generally, that sort of financial, increase. So trades, these are all things I'm here, like you find them out and it's like, oh, okay, there's ways, to try and look at things from a certain perspective. Or even if you look at these properties as an investment, if you have the capital, then that can be something where you don't even live there. You obviously look at it as an investment property, as maybe, fixer upper, if it is that, or get it as a rental, property for people to live in. So it just depends. But again, all of these things are based on what your financial situation is and what the capabilities you have around the system, and if you're working and you're doing a, good position, then that's something that you could potentially look to. But when it gets to a point where you're just the majority, as the majority are, which is, the median income for certain households are not where it needs to be able to get things like this, even a 300k property, as he was saying, then there's a major problem, major problem. And a lot of people, like I say, are just looking at what they can do per day, per month. And as long as they can do that, they're cool. A lot of people are saying, you know what? We're not even going to go too far, even when it comes to looking at retirement.
This may be the scariest stat on UK finances I've ever seen. And it's about millennials and whether they're set up for retirement. It is terrifying. Scroll away if you are queasy. Difficult to read, but only 3% of median income millennial households are predicted to reach PLSA, that is Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association, moderate retirement standards. Guys, that is fucking terrifying. Basically, it's saying that no one is set up to have a good time in retirement. You're still going to have to keep working to be able to afford anything well into your 70s and 80s. Two reasons for this. Number one, we do not invest enough in equities. There is a British issue with risk. People seem to think risk has negative connotations. No, risk is just a description of effectively volatility at the end of the day. That's a discussion for another day. But two, and where it's not millennials' fault necessarily, is that in 2008 or after 2008, pension funds started de-risking. They started moving away from equities, companies, shares, and moving more into bonds. This was because the Bank of England was obviously printing, doing QE, so bond prices went through the roof. However, that is pure de-risking. That is not providing a very good return at the end of the day. And it's really because they wanted to shore up defined benefit pension schemes. But it's really boring, doesn't really add much to the economy. And now what do we have? The UK has the lowest weight to equities in pension funds out of anywhere in the world. We are fucking ourselves over. We're fucking our own companies over, but it doesn't even matter because at the end of the day, you can also invest in, foreign equities. You can go to the US, but people in Britain just do not do that.
When it comes to what he's saying about the UK mentality, he's not lying. We have more of a pragmatic approach generally. British people, not all, but for the most part, I've noticed there's a pragmatic way of looking at things. People are happy as long as they've got some money in their account, that when they pay for their, living costs and everything, their outgoings, that they can have something left over to be able to account for an emergency, or they've got a savings, or they've got a cash ISA, or, but in terms of the whole, investing, I think that's more, I've noticed Gen Z are more inclined to start looking at these things, the whole crypto, trying to do these things. But people of a certain background, if they've grown up in a certain background, they will be more inclined, especially an older generation, to try and, look at investment opportunities and obviously look at things from more of a business standpoint. So there are alternatives, as he mentioned at the end there, looking at, further afield outside of, for example, the UK. But there has to be, again, a change in a lot of things. And schooling won't do it, people. Schooling won't do it. They're not designed for it. That's not their purpose. Has to be something that is discovered, from oneself and from one doing the Googles on it and doing the research on it, because that's just how it's going to be. And even savings in this country, it's not even a thing. But at the same time, a lot of people are also saying, when I get to those ages, I'm not even looking at the retirement because I know it's not going to happen. I'm just going to keep working until I'm no more. Retirement ages have been extended over the years. And yeah, a lot of people are trying to, and I'm sure, do the best they can to keep themselves in good nick as much as they can control, and know that they're going to work in their advanced years. And it will be better, though, if you're working in your advanced years on something that you actually like to do, though, and you're providing value and you're seeing the value return to you.
The purchasing power of our dollar from 1970 to 2025 has declined by 87%. If this continues over the next 40 years, us millennials and Gen Zers are going to need $2.7 million in our retirement account to have the same spending power as someone today with $1 million in their retirement account. Let's say in 2026, a boomer has $1 million in their retirement account, and they use the 4% rule. In the first year, they pull out $40,000. In order for us to have the same spending power today of $40,000, 40 years from now, at a 2.5% average inflation rate per year, we would need $108,000 in the future to feel and to have the same spending power as $40,000 today. So that means that we would need about $2.7 million in order to pull out that 4% of 108. So if you wanted to have $2.7 million, and let's say you're 30 years old and you have nothing in your retirement account, if we expect a 8% return while also reinvesting our dividends, we would have to put in $773 a month for the next 40 years in order for us to hit 2.7. Now, if that sounds too daunting, a lot of people can't afford that, I would highly recommend starting at $50 or $100. Build that habit. Do that for 5 years, 10 years if you have to. And once you start making more money, then start putting in 200, 300, 400. But anything is going to help to build that habit.
When you're at a certain point where you think this is going to be enough, you realize it's not. For it to change that dramatically, when he was talking about the comparisons of if you were to take out a certain amount, what it will be as time goes on, as opposed to a million, I think 1.8, now I guess 2 million plus. That's that. The average American is not thinking like of that. But the average UK person also is in the same boat. They're not thinking of that. It's not saying that you cannot have something sizable, but to that point, some people within the age groups that are within the millennial and Gen Z, particularly Gen Z, if they're at the earlier age, they can do that, you know. But it gets to a point where what steps are they doing now? Because you're going to need to be in that position now. You know, you're going to need to be in that position immediately where you can start contributing. You know, as you said, start small and then eventually you start working your way up to the 5 to 6 to 700s per month. But it has to be consistent for 10, 20 plus 30, 30 years. So yeah, a lot of people I can just imagine are saying, I'm trying to do the best they can for the now. Obviously you plan. Not everything's going to be perfect when you plan because plans can change. But as long as people are making steps to try and improve their current circumstance before they can think of anything that they don't even see because no one sees the future. But as long as people can make plans to improve their current, then people start looking above water and saying, okay, what else can I do after that? And I think that's the first step. Try and improve the current way you do things, current way you save, current way you spend. And then look forward. But I thought I'd look at, the two dynamics between Gen Z and Millennial. I thought I'd do a video about it. What do you guys think? What is the sort of, thoughts you have about what you thought life would be as a Gen Z or Millennial? And what did you think about some of these perspectives? Do you have any thoughts about milestone anxiety or financial insecurity of how you believe maybe you could be a bit unstable financially, or future worries or future thoughts about how retirement and all these things can look like?